Hello, everybody. Welcome to the inaugural Facebook Live for Thriving in... right, it's just moved again.
Right.
A few settling in issues here. So this is the first Facebook Live, the inaugural interview for Thriving Adoptees. You know, normally it's just video. Normally it's just audio. Today's obviously video, and this will become an audio too. So why are we here? Why are we here? Well, my good friend Jude is over from North Carolina, and I've hopped over from Leeds to meet her because she's here with her husband. And we thought, well, why don't we do a live interview? Jude hasn't been on the podcast before, so we thought we'll do the interview live.
Perfect.
Did I remember everything?
I believe so. We're in Ireland.
We're in Ireland, Dublin. Yeah, Dublin, Ireland.
Yeah.
Americans, for some reason, need to say that, you know, like Paris, France. Yeah, we've heard that there is a Paris, Texas. You know, there's a Paris in Texas. But if you just say Paris and show me an Arc de Triomphe or an Eiffel Tower, we know that it's France, not Texas. Yeah, Dublin, Ireland. Dublin, Ireland. So, Jude and her husband came over on the inaugural flight of JetBlue. So you can have an inaugural flight to Dublin and an inaugural version video interview right here.
That's right.
So today we're talking, as we always talk about on Thriving Adoptees, we're talking about healing. So, Jude, what does healing mean to you?
Healing to me means having the freedom to be wholly myself, to be fully myself, true to my essence, and to live free in that, to feel comfortable to be me, and to enjoy life. Wow,
freedom. So we're back. There is a French link here. You know, we talked about Paris, France. What did it say? Égalité, liberté, and something. There's three things, or one of them of French is freedom, right? And obviously in the States you've got the Statue of Liberty too. Right? Yeah. So freedom. There's quite a lot to unpack there. What helps us get to that place? What's the journey?
It's been a really long journey for me. Maybe like a 30, 40 year journey. I'm in my 50s. I would say, but there's been certain key moments, and the biggest one, which I've talked with you about, was the aha around separating myself from my trauma-bound identity, and realizing that I have a wholeness, my true essence, that is whole and free from the trauma, from the wound, and that I can move and be in that, free from all the wounding and the trauma and the beliefs and the patterning that is entangled in that.
So this isn't like it's a bit strange, ladies and gentlemen, because we don't know. I don't know where to look. Look at the screen.
We don't know where to look.
Or look and we're in a business lounge of a hotel, and people are starting to think we're going a bit nuts. Right. So this, when you say it's an aha moment, this is an aha moment of extreme profundity. I would say, right? It's not just I know how to get to the airport faster. It's something that's really deep in your soul. Yeah.
Yes, it's like we've talked, like an embodied aha, and then there's an unfolding, there's an unfolding where it becomes I'm processing it more and more, and it's becoming more and more embodied and true, and changes how I am interacting with the world outside of me.
Yeah.
And the world inside of me.
So, like that distinction. So, are you saying, like, rather than this being like just an idea in your head or something that you get in your heart, you're saying embodied? So, it's like the whole of you, the whole of your essence. It's not a flash in the pan, or a nice idea, or a bumper sticker, or a theory. It's something much deeper than that.
It's becoming something that I own and know in my cells, like the cell of my being.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me in then, the cell of your being, because everybody
cells,
the cells of your being, not the cell of a prison, right? So you're talking about, because everybody quotes this Bessel van der Kolk, the body keeps the score.
Yes.
Right. If you're talking about being at a cellular level, you're talking about a departure of the trauma-based cells, a departure of the trauma-infused cells, and a replacement with the whole cells. Is that what?
New cells. Well,
yeah.
I would say I do believe in neuroplasticity, and I know that the body regenerates its cells, and we can change the information within our cells. So I do believe that is likely part of the process. I wish I had a PhD in that, but I don't, so I don't want to be like, yes. But I do believe that, at least that in my felt sense, in my sensory awareness, in my sensory experience, is true. I am not who I once was, and I am not interacting with the world in the ways that I once did. And as a result, I would say the proof is in the pudding. As a result, my whole life has shifted, and I'm enjoying life. And I would say that my baseline of where I'm operating from has changed. I know I had shared with you that I used to think I was depressed, and I lived from that place for most of my life. And to shift to a much higher state of being still feels a little foreign. It's still new, but it's been 3 years now, and it's very solid. At the same time, and I look at my life and oh my gosh, how did I get all this? How did I get here? And what by all this, I just mean feeling good. I just feel good, and I didn't know. I always hoped it was possible. I believed it was possible, but I didn't know that I would ever experience it in this lifetime.
Yeah. So going back to the cells thing, then I've heard that from a scientist. Our bodies have is a 7-year cycle.
Yes.
Within 7 years, every cell within our body has been replaced. So that would be kind of consistent if we were flushing out the trauma out of the cells and replace them with whole cells. If we and you've got this lovely distinction between the trauma-bound identity, and then what's the other bit? What's the opposite?
I call it our earthbound identity, because that is, we live on Earth. It is our human experience, and I would say one of the main differentiators would be coming from a fear-based anchor, place, and a heart-based anchor, a love anchored existence.
Okay.
A way of looking at the world.
So I love the earthbound one, because people might think that we're actually on a different planet. So right? I'm glad that you reminded everybody that we live on Earth. And some people walking in here may think that we're living on a different planet.
You never know.
You never know. So if that I came up with an idea last week, because I like my metaphors. I told you about this this metaphor of a sponge, right?
Yeah.
So I was thinking about I was talking to somebody about the in utero stuff that goes on often for us adoptees, because so our birth mothers are stressed out, to put it politely. Often they're under a lot of maybe a lot of pressure. They're feeling out of sorts. They know that if they've got an adoption plan,
right?
Like my birth mother had a plan before I was born. So she knows that she's gonna be losing this baby that's been in her for 9 months, right? So she's got high degree of cortisol, right?
Toxic stress
and cortisol. And I was thinking about I was thinking about metaphors, and I was thinking, for some reason, I came up with this idea of a bucket and a sponge. So if we're washing our car, right? So we've got some hot water, a bit of soap in it. We've got a sponge. We drop the sponge in there, and the sponge sucks up a load of water, right? We take the sponge out, and we can't see the water in the sponge, but we can obviously squeeze it out, right? So I came up with this idea. Healing basically is squeezing the cortisol. Imagine that that sponge is us, and the water is cortisol that we've been bathing in the uterus. Is that right? In utero. Yeah, right. We've been taking it pickled. Yeah, we've been pickled in cortisol, which leads us to do slightly strange things later on in life. Anyway, but so if we're squeezing the water out of the sponge, healing is basically getting the cortisol out of the system. And maybe if we say that the cortisol's in the cells, that's that 7-year journey to which all our cells are replaced.
Right. Well, and it really takes us back to biological basics of like homeostasis. Our bodies are always wanting to resolve, to heal, to be in wholeness, to be in balance. And so homeostasis is our body's natural immunity in essence, to bring things back into balance. And that it's bringing that cortisol, bring everything back into balance. And it is always working toward that. And so we often, as children with trauma, infant trauma, relinquishment and abandonment trauma, mother separation trauma, we have lived in a state of imbalance. Our nervous systems have been dysregulated. And so it is all trying to bring us back to, and use everything that's happening in our lives to bring us back into that balanced state. To wholeness.
So this is fizzy water, right? So imagine I just squeezed the sponge. That's the cortisol. And the reason that I'm banging on about this, because we're separating who we are, right, the sponge, from the trauma.
Yeah.
In the shape of the cortisol. And as Jude mentioned so eloquently, talking about this homeostasis. Homeostasis is about going home. Homeostasis. See, I can't pronounce it. Luckily, got Jude with me. So with homeostasis, that kind of links into what your organisation's called, isn't it?
It does.
Home. Homeostasis.
You're so good at that.
Home.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
finding home.
Finding home. Yeah. So that's what we're doing. We're returning, or as Nancy Verrier says in the second book, returning to home, doesn't it?
To home, to self. To self, yeah.
Yeah. I wonder why she describes the book that describes the primal wounds is about that big. Yeah. And it's got like thousands of scores and rankings
readers
and readers.
Everybody loves that book.
And then, but the second book is about that high, and hardly anybody's reviewed it.
Yeah.
You wonder why that? No. One of those things. So,
good question.
If we go back to the start then, so for you, healing is about profound insights.
It has been a journey of profound insights, and for me, it's been a little bit like Dorothy the Wizard of Oz, and I went looking outside of myself for all the answers and for healing. I grew up knowing something was wrong. I just didn't know that it had to do with my roots and adoption. And when I had that aha in 2019, that for me, that was my coming out of the fog moment, although there may have been all sorts of smaller moments getting me there, but that was a huge aha, to recognize that what was wrong and what I kept trying to heal was at these roots, this root experience. And then another aha around the trauma-bound identity, that my identity had been so entangled with the trauma that I didn't really know who I was, and I had to slowly untangle that and differentiate what was the trauma and what is me, and separate that out and tease it out. And that was For me, and everyone is different, it was a process of about 3 years until I realized, oh, this is who I am. And then that really shifted everything for me. Yeah.
So it was a case of mistaken identity.
It was. I think, and I did change my name after coming out of fog, and I think that could be why so many we change our name, and I think it is staking claim and claiming who we are, and our identity,
So carrying on with the identity thing, it's a case of mistaken identity, and also some might say like identity theft, right?
Oh, well, most definitely, if you think about it, right?
So
we've been
what's
given
trauma?
A false identity.
Yeah, we've been given a false identity, but on a couple of different levels, right?
Yeah.
So the name, the name, right?
Yeah.
So I was David Anthony Flower, and now I'm Simon Jonathan Band, right?
I was. Yeah. I wasn't given a name. I was the baby.
Oh. I'm feeling sorry for little Jude. With little Jude's parts. Yeah, parts. How do you get on with those parts? Have you done that parts work?
The parts work? I have heard about the parts work. Yeah. And to me, it's a little similar to shadow work or inner child, right? Like the way we are relating to different parts of ourselves and pieces and aspects of our psyche, or and what is interesting, because I have done shadow work, a lot of that, and inner child, is as I became more whole, that kind of connecting to pieces of me fell away, and it's like I'm just whole. Like I just connect to me as a whole instead of fragmented, and so I find that interesting that those things kind of just.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that your birth mother was told not to give you a name.
Well, my circumstance, or her circumstance, which also is mine, was that she was raped, and so, and then found herself pregnant, and in 1968, abortion was not legal. So she found herself in a pretty difficult situation where she didn't want to connect with the baby inside of her at all, right? So, right, and it's also, I'm sure, was encouraged.
Isn't she brave, ladies and gentlemen?
Thank you. I'm sure she was encouraged also because she wasn't going to keep it to not connect. And I think it just made it easier, just the baby, the baby.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
Little tears, yeah.
Yeah, well, that used to bring up a ton of emotion in me, and now it still can, and today I'm good. Yeah.
Yeah. Because one of my ways I kind of sum that up is, healing is being triggered less.
Yeah, it is.
And I guess being more specifically to tie into what you just said, not being triggered by the stuff that used to trigger us.
Yes, I think when, being triggered means that our nervous systems are being activated and becoming dysregulated, right? So homeostasis is being imbalanced. So when we still have emotional energy left from a trauma in our bodies and we are activated, it's trying to release some of that energy.
Wow.
Right, we're releasing that energy. So over time, it will become less, right? Over time, if we actually process it, so we can either.
Why does nobody else sum that up so well that you do?
I have no idea. So it can either be on a loop.
You heard it first here.
It can either be on a loop that we're replaying over and over, or we have the aha moment that shifts it, and it plays out and it releases, right? And then it happens less and less.
So how would you relate that back to my sponge and cortisol?
Well, it is. It's like the body is trying to release it a little at a time. And I think it's really the body's wisdom, because I've heard this, and I don't absolutely know if it's absolutely true, but I have heard, if the body were to release it all at once, it would damage us. It could kill us. It would be too much for us. It's so much energy. And so it is releasing bits at a time, and sometimes big parts at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, what we can handle. We build capacity and resilience over time, and we can release it more and more.
So the extension of the metaphor that's popping up into my head is it's almost as if, as another part of trauma, trauma puts the sponge in a plastic bag, right? You know, because when you buy a sponge, it's often it's in like shrink wrap or whatever we call it. So a part of the trauma is it kind of seals us off. It seals the sponge. It seals the sponge in its plastic, and if it's sealed in its plastic, then the cortisol ain't going to come out, is it?
No,
it's just going to stay stuck.
Well, and sometimes that is part of our protective coping mechanisms, right? To replay the trauma. We kind of get trauma lenses.
Yes.
That we see the world through. Like for me, it was abandonment, and I kept replaying the abandonment story. That was my narrative, and it is, everybody abandons me, the world abandons me, and so I would end up seeing that everywhere I went, and giving that meaning to things.
Yeah,
it was abandonment.
So touched on that with Jeff. I was telling you about the interview with Jeff Forney out in LA last night. No, I wasn't in LA. I was just in Zoom in my house in Hunziker. But he was talking about the lens. I think it's a really good metaphor for how we see stuff. And my favourite mentor teacher guy at the moment, this Rupert Spira guy, he talks about the fact that if we've got orange glasses on, then snow appears orange.
Yeah.
When clearly it's white. So,
I think that's especially true for adoptees or anyone that has early childhood trauma, because our personality was not formed prior to our trauma, so we don't have a before to go back to and say, wait, I'm perceiving things differently than I used to before my trauma. So it is our normals. So we think my lenses on life are fine. I don't need to take these off and see differently, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a bit like the have you heard that old story about if you put a frog in cold water,
and then
don't do this. Yeah. Ladies at home.
Don't try this.
Don't try this. But yeah, it doesn't sense the water.
Yeah.
But if you put it into a hot thing, it jumps straight out. Yeah. Do you think they've ever done that?
Somebody did it.
Somebody did it to come up with the story.
Yeah.
So, if healing is about these profound insights, and nobody talks about that either, did they? They say, "Oh, healing's about therapy," or "Healing's about connecting with fellow adoptees," or "Healing's about reading a book," or so they kind of they're all talking about the strategies. They're talking about the strategies rather than the aha moments.
It is
but those things, they're the means to the end. The end is healing. The end is an insight.
Yes.
And I guess it's not just once and done. It's that percolation, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
The percolation of the idea.
It is that spiral, I call it that spiral of growth. But, I think our body, I like to call it a compass, or my enchanted compass, but it is the guidance system that we have been given. And that homeostasis, I believe, prompts these aha moments. And what those moments are is the unconscious becoming conscious. It is something the body has known and operated in, and it's been separated from us in our unconscious.
That's the Jung quote, isn't it? Until they...
Oh, it is Carl Jung. And the unconscious, if you look at the iceberg picture, is, it's like 90% is underwater, and that's our unconscious, and that is driving our everyday choices and actions and so much of our life. And then the conscious part is like 5-10% above the water, and it operates at a much slower speed. I have this information somewhere, I'll get it to you. And the unconscious part is like tons more information at a much higher speed. It's really interesting. But those aha moments it's our unconscious becoming conscious. And then once it's conscious, it's in our awareness, and we can begin to resolve it.
Okay.
But when it's unconscious, we don't know. It's driving and we don't know.
So that I don't know if we've talked about this recently.
I keep looking at you here. I go look at you
here. We talked about that recently. Coming out of the fog is that, isn't it?
It's one of those moments.
It's one of those moments when we become conscious of something that we were unconscious of before. And an idea that's coming to me a lot at the moment is the fact that the first one is the biggie on this, but then for the rest of our lives we will be the different levels of trauma will be surfacing. Will be coming. Well, that kind of fits in with your metaphor for the iceberg. So the iceberg is going to be coming further, more and more of the iceberg. If that's the sea, more and more of the iceberg is going to be revealed, and we'll see more and more of it. And also, I guess it will melt if it's sunny.
It will melt if it's sunny. And really, I think that's the human journey. I don't think that's only adoptees. I think that's the human journey of making the unconscious conscious, right? And living from a more conscious place. More wholeness, right? Where, So.
Yeah. Wow. It's pretty deep.
Kind of deep.
Kind of deep. That's where the good stuff is, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's where the good stuff is. So, what do you think? Well, no. Before I ask that, can you take us through, like, the what just the granular detail of what happened on that? Do you remember that moment? You talked about that moment 3 years ago. Can you give us a bit of context and kind of slow it right down for us?
When I separated out from my trauma-bound identity.
Yeah.
That one?
The click.
I had been working with a friend who works with trauma and energetics, and we were talking about the trauma-bound identity, and it wasn't really named yet. Michelle Franks, I'm going to give you a shout out. And
thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle. And in the talk about the energetics of it, we were talking about like fascia in the human body and the entanglement that happens if you have a physically acute injury energetically. It's much the same. And she was like, it's like your identity is trauma bound. And I was like, that ding 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 ding, that's it, like that's the name. And so once we named it and I could begin to understand what was happening with my trauma and how it was playing out and how entangled my identity was, it was a short time after that I had like a huge a big relationship abandonment, a relationship ending, and it felt like this huge abandonment, and it really mirrored that first wounding to me. And because of that life experience, and the understanding that the role the trauma was playing, as I went through it, I was differentiating, like I said, what's my trauma, what's really who I am. And so as I went through this experience that felt like abandonment, rejection, and I was very purposefully differentiating things and journaling and feeling, what am I feeling in my body, I was almost like tearing apart the trauma-bound identity from who I was. And I could really feel it, even in my body.
Wow.
So it was almost like through the abandonment and looking at it, living through it in a different way, from a different perspective, I was able to really separate out from the trauma-bound identity and pull away from it and begin to choose differently. I'm going to live differently. I could see it very clearly.
So the first step was the insight of, a trauma-bound identity. And then the second step was a repeat. The second event was a repeat of the loss, the abandonment stuff.
Yeah.
And you put those two things together.
Yeah. So
do you remember putting those? Do you remember when was there a moment when did you wake up one morning and you thought, put those two things together? Or do you remember that?
I think, by having the languaging, it was in my conscious awareness.
Okay.
Right? And so it gave me the scaffolding, it gave me the path, so I could look at the abandonment, which, I've gone through many abandonments in life, and there, I kind of was seeing it in a lot of things. And it was that I was like, oh, this isn't about me. This is about that person, what they need. And it was no longer about me being abandoned. So having that languaging enabled me to go through what I would have called abandonment in a different way. And then after it was all done and I processed it, I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't handle it from my trauma-bound identity. I just handled it as me, as Jude, and I could see what was the trauma and what was me. And so, and then the more you work through life that way, the less that affects you at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a big glimpse. It was more than a glimpse, was it?
Yeah. Yes.
Like in 3 or 4 words, it's not taking abandonment personally.
Not taking abandonment personally. It's not about me.
Because
It was never about me. Not even the first abandonment. It wasn't, right? My mother was raped. It's not about me. It had nothing to do with me. It was the circumstances and the times and the choices that she had to make, and the people around her helped her make or told her to make, right? It was never about me. No. Ever.
So what do you think stops us? It wasn't personal.
Yeah.
So what do you think stops us having those insights? Or what has stopped you having your insights? Because you're talking about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And you're mid-50s.
Yeah.
So
why did it take so long?
Why did it take so long? I've thought about that myself as well.
I have too. I have some theories, but I'll share just from my personal experience. I think the body will kind of allow it's about capacity building, what I was able to handle. You're talking about an infant that went through something that was so traumatic and terrifying and had no context for that kind of trauma. And so our bodies took in a lot of cortisol. We stayed in that state for a very long time, at least I did. And so I had to capacity build all these years to be able to really face the largeness of what my body had been carrying and went through as an infant.
So it's the body's power over the intellect, is it? I'm seeing it, I'm saying insights, I'm talking about seeing it, I'm talking about seeing it, you're talking about it being embodied trauma, a system flooded with cortisol, rather than just a nice idea.
Yeah, the amount of grief that I was carrying personally, I had to build enough capacity to release that. That amount of grief was very heavy. And the anger, so I had to build capacity to release it. And I think sometimes the body just lets us release little bits. Right? And then we build capacity.
Because you said earlier on, didn't you, that if it all came out in one go,
it'd be too much for us.
It'd be too much, you wouldn't be able to handle it.
I think we'd have a mental breakdown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of I'm thinking of a swimming metaphor.
Okay.
Right. So do you know how far it is from England to France across the Channel?
I did learn that in school, but no, I don't.
Well, why would you be interested in? I don't know why they'd be interested in English geography, British geography.
No,
why would you be
learn
interested in? Yeah. Okay. It's 22 miles approximately.
Okay. I know somebody swam it.
So, yeah, people do swim it, and it was one of my
goals,
dreams. Yeah, one of my goals to swim it. But then I found out how much poo you have to swim through, and jellyfish.
Okay.
And I just thought, no, that doesn't sound like fun.
Simon's not a shit swimmer.
No. And so it's sort of it's like your capacity building in this analogy is, you get your 2 length badge, right? So you've swum 50 yards or 50 meters, and then you try and swim the channel. You don't do that. You kind of build up to it, don't you?
Yeah. Yes. And when the ego or psyche like identifies with the wound, I think it's very hard to let that go. It becomes an existential crisis, right?
The ego identifies with the wound.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, I think there's something big here. So can you explain that a little bit more?
Maybe. So our ego has different identities, and that we put on our business identity. We might put on our father, like I'm a dad now, and so we have different roles that we play. And one of our roles as an adoptee, orphaned, archetype role, is the wound. So we have that is part of us, and to be whole, we have to let that go.
We think that we are our trauma.
Yeah. So that's the trauma-bound identity. So to let that go, it's like letting go a huge piece of us. We almost have to grieve that even, or release it, and that's not who we are. That's a big deal. That's existential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've heard, again, this is Rupert Spira. Thank you, Rupert. He's got a great metaphor for this, which I think is kind of similar. Like, so what we want, it's the moth to the flame, right? Mm-hmm. So the moth is the ego, and the flame is who we really are. So
okay.
The moth wants, more than anything else, to be happy, peaceful, that sort of stuff, right? So it's drawn towards the flame.
Okay.
And then it gets within about 2 inches of the flame, and it stops because it realizes it has to die into the flame.
Yes.
And that's when it really, really kicks off. And you were talking...
That's really good.
You were talking about... Thank you. It's not mine, it's Rupert's.
That's it.
Right,
yeah.
Okay. So you were talking about...
it's the ego death, and
ego death.
It can cause a dark night of the soul, and who am I?
So you were talking about a conversation I had with Heidi, Heidi Marwells from Pulled by the Roots.
Yeah.
And you said that this might...
Yeah, you might have. That could...
Because I was explaining some of my metaphors to her, and she was thinking, this is great.
Yeah.
And quite often after we have these aha moments, then the ego comes back with a vengeance.
It can.
Because it's been thinking this stuff, suffering this suffering for ages.
Yes.
And it says, well, I've got to 52, or I've got to 48. I've got to 48, and I've been thinking this stuff for the last 47 years or 44 years, whatever it is, and now you're showing me a whole new world. You're a lying bastard, basically. Yeah, that's it. It's a dark night of the soul. It's when
dark night of the soul.
It's the fight. It's the fight back. It's the comeback.
Yeah, they call it ego backlash. Yeah.
Ego backlash.
Ego backlash. Well, yeah, and honestly, the ego
sounds like a Rocky movie.
The ego is our filter between our inner world and outer world, and I think we end up putting too much, especially Western. We put so much emphasis on the mind, so it's taken on more of a role than it was meant to have.
And its role was to keep us safe.
Its role is to keep us safe.
Its role to keep us safe.
Its role is to keep us safe, yeah.
And
right.
And is that the...
But we gave it all sorts of decision.
But that's the stuff that keeps us stuck, yeah?
It keeps us
So
stuck.
that's the cling film on the... Is that the cling film on the sponge?
Maybe. And that it does. It keeps us stuck because it keeps it in our subconscious, our unconscious, right? Instead of letting it out into our awareness. Right?
Why would it do that?
Because it wants to keep the role. It wants to keep playing the role. The same role. If I play the role, I'm safe.
Yeah.
And if we see the man behind the curtain, right?
So I'm feeling the need to go back to your Wizard of Oz metaphor now. Yeah. So what happens? I think there's something there, isn't there?
After you see so you have the great and powerful Wizard of Oz, and he's all scary, and then you just see it's a little old man behind the curtain, and he's not so magical. And then he still promises to help her get home, but he doesn't get her home. You know who gets her home? She does. She's got the shoes with her, and Glinda the Good Witch says, "You had the power within you all along. It's inside of you.
It's inside of us." So I'm thinking about the Wizard of Oz, right? So I'm thinking about the adoptees, an adoptee equivalent. And
she was an adoptee.
What?
Dorothy? She's adopted.
I didn't know that. And I'm thinking, have I seen that film all the way through? Because there's a lot of films I haven't seen all the way through. Sound of Music for one of them. I'm just thinking about what if we were to what if we were to make it, rather than the Wizard of Oz?
Yeah.
The big, and he's a scary wizard, isn't he, as well?
He is.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
So I'm trying to think of an adoptee specific equivalent for the Wizard of Oz. What could that be?
I don't know. I like Dorothy and Alice. They're my go-to people. But I don't know. And where was Alice's mother?
You're with Alison. I haven't even read
Alice
that.
Okay.
I'm thinking like
Harry Potter.
Oh right, no, I'm thinking. The Grim Reaper.
Why?
Well, because he's got that sickle. And what do you do with a sickle?
Cut things.
Cut things, right? And what happens? What does a cut? What's another word for a cut?
I don't know.
What's another word for the cut? Nancy Berry. Wound, primal wound.
The wound.
So what we're saying really, what?
The Grim Reaper.
The Grim Reaper. Yeah, well, he's killing our identity. He's killing our. He's using his sickle to put and this is we're joking about it.
Yeah.
But adoptee suicide, right?
Oh yeah. That's true. That's a downer.
That's a downer.
That's really that's very real. And I don't know if you ever had suicidal ideation, but I did. It's very real. And I do think it goes back to those initial moments of terror and feeling like we were going to die. I know through different, like I did EFT, and that came up, and I re-experienced some of those infant feelings. And,
EFT, what's EFT?
Emotional freedom technique. It's tapping. And I have a practitioner who specializes in inner child, and so she was able to work with me there. It was good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very real.
I'm thinking of a Brit adoptee called Joy that I interviewed ages and ages ago, and she was a twin, and she was found in the bush in somewhere in Africa, so I can't remember which, by her mum and dad, who were missionaries or something, and then adopted into the UK, transracial adoptee, and all that goes with that identity confusion. But she was found next to her dead twin sister.
That's heartbreaking. Well, and I think why did I survive? There's a lot there. That would be very hard. That'd be very challenging to carry. That's challenging. Yeah.
What do they call it? Survivor's guilt.
Survivor's guilt. I think there can be healer's guilt as well.
Healer's guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us more.
Well, I at least sometimes I experience it. Like I said in the beginning, I always hoped and believed that it's not like you just get to the other side. There's always more. But that I would be able to feel the way I do now about life and myself. But even when I was hoping and believing, there was a piece of me that didn't think it was possible. And so then I get there, and I then sustain it for a few years. So I know I'm like sustaining it and holding it. And so it's not just going to go poof. And then I see, I work in our community, and I see where people are
struggles,
at. Yeah, and I can have, I feel like I want to keep my story in, or I don't want to share it, or I don't want to seem too happy, because I know the reality of what they carry and what they live with, and have lived it. I've been there, done that. And so I kind of sometimes will temper it down.
So that's another... And so it's another kind of ego thing, isn't it? It's like...
Most likely, yeah.
Like we feel...
And it could be an extension of the wound, wanting to fit in, wanting to belong.
Yeah.
Right? Because there would be nothing worse, and I have come up against this, and it's been made very clear to me through my own inner understanding, that there would be nothing worse, I think, for an adoptee than to be abandoned by their own tribe, which is adoptees, right? Like, oh, well, you can't be that well.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah. Who she thinks she is? Bye.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Toxic positivity.
That could be said for sure.
That could be said. But
that's not real.
That's but that's gonna.
Yeah.
I had this strange moment about, I think it was about 6 weeks ago now, 2 months or so ago, when I felt because I spend time looking at stuff at social media, and there's so many advocates out there trying to get the message across to change the narrative. Say, right, you're what do they call it? Rainbows and unicorns is wrong. And so we're trying, and I was thinking, this doesn't. I was thinking at one level, so this doesn't affect me. Like ego sciences, that doesn't affect me. And then it all landed on me. It was a Monday afternoon. I'd done a couple of calls, and I just felt the world of. I felt all the stuff on my shoulders, and it was. I guess it was me coming out of the fog about how I feel that basically I've seen this advocacy stuff, and it's been triggering me, and I've been thinking that was above it. I thought, I'm not affecting me. That's not
going to activate me.
What? Yeah, that's not going to. No.
Yeah.
Have you ever had that?
Of course. We think we're beyond something, and then it will hit some other little area, and so the beauty of that is what's happening is it's coming into your awareness, to be seen, to be resolved, to be dealt with.
And it's almost as if that resolved itself pretty quickly. So you talked about the trauma-bound identity, and then this. You talked about spotting the truth, hearing the three key words: trauma-bound identity.
Yes. Yeah.
And then the abandonment of the ending of this relationship, and you put those two things together. It's almost as if, as I look back on that moment of feeling the world on my shoulders and recognizing it came to the surface really quickly, and then it didn't take a long time to heal. Process, it came out into the light, and I think, oh, I've done that. Whereas maybe a couple of years ago, I would have sat with that. I would have sat with the world on my shoulders for maybe 2 days, maybe 2 weeks. Not like
months and
2 minutes like it did then. So it's almost like healing. It gets faster.
Well,
does healing get faster?
Yeah, I think that's the capacity building. You've built capacity, right? You've built resilience, so you are resilient, right? There's a difference between being reactionary and resiliency, right? Or being in survival and getting through, and resiliency. Resiliency feels completely different, right, than just getting through. I'm strong arming through. So you've built capacity, you've built resilience, you're differentiating, right? So the languaging around all of this really helps us, and we're skill building with, okay, well, I know how to manage this. I know what this is. I've seen it before, and it passes, right? So yeah, you're resolving it much quicker.
I had no idea of all that.
Yeah, that's what you're doing.
Oh.
So it's sensory awareness. We are entering into an age of greater sensory awareness and making these connections. Isn't
there something here about becoming consciously unconscious? What do people say about that?
Consciously unconscious.
Consciously, you were unconsciously unconscious, then we're consciously unconscious.
Yeah,
I can't remember how that goes.
Yeah, we're shifting, right, that what's unconscious to greater consciousness.
Yeah. But you're breaking it. I'm just thinking, I'll bounce back quicker.
Yeah.
But then you're breaking it down into those different things, the resiliency and the capacity building and etc. And I was thinking like surviving to thriving, the shifting, getting by to getting through to...
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, we want to get to that where we feel like we're thriving. So, yeah.
So... why is nobody else talking about this stuff?
I think some people are, but not a lot.
Nobody. I mean, it's mainly happening in therapy rooms, I guess.
I don't know about. I think therapy, they like it to just keep going, so I'm not so sure. I don't know. Like when I've had just talk therapy, it just for me it's been the therapies that that are somatic in nature or energetic that have really created the biggest shifts for me personally.
I wish I had a quid. That's a pound. I wish I had a quid. I wish I had a pound for every time I'd said something like, talk therapy doesn't work if we don't have words, or talk therapy doesn't work on pre-verbal trauma over the last kind of 3 or 4 months, because I've been getting that message drip fed. Pretty much every therapist I've spoken to is
therapy.
Has said that to me. Talk therapy doesn't work, so you need to do the somatic stuff. So that's what I'm doing.
Okay. Yeah, I think therapy is supportive. It helps, especially if you're going through a healing process, it helps to talk it out loud. There's something about saying things out loud as well that makes them more solidified. So, I think that's why support groups for adoptees, I'll give a shout out to Fireside, is really great.
Hello, Fireside.
Things like that are really great.
Hello, Amanda, because obviously Amanda,
look at us.
Yeah, Amanda introduced us.
There's so many components that
so
are
people don't.
in our healing.
They may not. They don't feel alone anymore. They feel validated. But
that ding, 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 validation. The thing, we have to be acknowledged. Yes, that's right. That's true. So the acknowledgement, the validation, that somehow helps the growth, the expansion, the healing, the resolving, kind of almost exponentially. When I have seen that because I facilitate a small group, when I see that happening, that process of validation seems to speed things along.
And yet,
it
can keep us stuck, can't it?
It can. Not the validation part, but yes. Sometimes, yeah, okay.
So
I'm like, that's a whole other thing, but yes.
That's another thing. So the only bit that I can see for this, I can only speak for myself. I've had a lot of coaching over the years, and I was very resistant, I think, to change early in being coached. I've been coached for probably 20 years, like business coaching stuff as well.
I understand.
Yeah. What a great coach does, or what a great coach has done for me, is they find out where I am, and at some point they invalidate my beliefs. or they get me, they ask me a question that gets me to invalidate my beliefs, gets me to change my beliefs, gets me to see something new.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, and that's the bit. If I put that bit with the validation bit, so I'm putting I'm talking about validation within business coaching, and I put that alongside the validation of the traumas. I just think, like,
it's validating the experience, not the trauma.
What's the difference?
What's the difference? The difference would be, because I think, at least in my experience within the adoptee realm, and in my own life, I'll stick with that even, I was living an outer experience and an inner experience of, like, within my family growing up, so what I was experiencing in my inner world had never really been validated until I was in adoptee support circles and groups. And so having that validated that experience, that something was amiss, that something was actually going on, was really important.
I'm not going mad. No.
I'm not, like, this is real.
This is a normal reaction to an abnormal.
Yeah. And so then I can begin to process, release, and move on. Right? And I think what you're trying to hit at is sometimes we're in those circles and we stay at that space of just talking about it and not really processing, integrating, building capacity, and moving on.
Like,
we stay stuck in the wound.
Nobody tells us that we're not our trauma.
We're not our trauma, right?
Nobody,
we end up just kind of poking at the wound, right?
Nobody makes that until they do. Nobody differentiates between the trauma-bound identity and the earth-bound identity.
Well, no one says there's a whole skill set that you need to move on, or to to operate differently in the world, because you've been operating one way, so now there's a whole other way to be.
Or they write, if you the Nancy Berry book, she writes that book about that thick on that, and it's all about how we feel, not who we are.
Okay.
How we feel, not who we are.
Yeah.
It's all about, it's totally psychological rather than essential.
Well, and she's a psychologist, right? We are not our thoughts. We are not our feelings. We're not even this body, right? We have a core essence. Maybe some people call it spirit or soul or your higher self, whatever.
Or
right?
if you think that's too woo-woo, consciousness.
Or consciousness,
or
I
awareness.
like consciousness. Yeah.
Or awareness.
Awareness, I like that even more, actually. But that essence is really who we are, and it is, and we have an intrinsic worth and value, right? That,
So it's, I'm trying to.
And it's unwoundable, as
it's
Simon
unwoundable,
said.
yeah.
Cheers.
It's that bit where it's the difference between. I think you might like this.
Okay.
The content, thoughts, feelings, sensations, right? And the context. Yeah. Okay. So it's the screen. The screen is the context for the movie, which is the content.
Oh, thank you, Heather. Good to see you too. Hi from Ireland, Heather.
So, content versus context. So it's, context was another
Simon's
word for awareness.
Context is awareness.
And context is awareness.
And then content is what is added.
What's on it,
Okay.
So here's one for you, right? I'm going to ask you a question about this.
Okay.
Right. People say, adoptees say, we don't come as a blank slate.
We don't come
as a blank slate.
Meaning to the adopted parents in household.
Yes, we arrive, and we're not a blank slate. Okay.
Yeah.
So what's on the
slate?
What's on the slate?
Well, and see, when they're saying that, they're saying
writing.
Yeah.
Writing.
Yeah, there's writing on the slate.
There's writing on the slate, and the writing is trauma.
It's trauma.
Trauma, but the writing, that's the writing, and that's the difference between the writing and the slate.
Yeah, I love that. And I think they're also saying, though, their biology is on that slate. That they know, like, biologically in the body.
Yeah, that's the pre-verbal trauma. So the
before that, they know, like...
The pre-verbal trauma
yeah.
is the writing on the slate.
Agreed.
So what we're talking about here is... well, I'm back to my sponge and
You're
cortisol.
back to the slate. You're like, but we're the slate.
Okay, well, yeah. I'm separating. I'm separating what's on the slate to the slate itself.
Okay.
We're not a blank slate because we're loaded. We come
Yes.
preloaded with the trauma.
Yes.
So the sponge is soaked in cortisol.
Yes.
And nobody knew.
And nobody knew.
Well, we didn't know in 1967 when I was adopted, or 1968 that you were adopted.
Yeah.
Nobody knew that.
Nobody knew.
Nobody knew that.
Yeah. Nobody
That's
knew
another
about
one.
the trauma. Right? Because had our parents known, it would be different.
It would be different.
They
would,
didn't know.
We keep on saying this, and
Yeah.
our parents are doing the best that they can.
Yeah.
We're judging 20th century parenting with 21st century trauma knowledge.
Yeah, true. That's good.
Cool.
Yeah.
About
All
time to bring it in, I
It
think.
is.
Unless you've got
No, that's
a final thing to say. Links in the show notes when this is an audio, right?
Yeah.
To Jude's socials and stuff.
okay.
And thanks a lot. And thanks
Thank
for
you, Simon.
being a guest on the inaugural Facebook Live.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
And bye-bye, listeners, for people listening to the audio. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.